and welcome to the session on digital identity. So today I'm going to talk to you about a Microsoft technology that I'm particularly passionate about, digital identity. It is an infrastructure layer, so it is crucial to securing our customers and protecting privacy of our users. It is also a piece of technology that you will bump into for sure at some point of your developer career. So the earlier you meet this world, the better. Let's go. Digital identity was also a space where my passion and Microsoft's work came together. Since before I joined Microsoft, I was working in an international NGO on a decentralized identity project for marginalized communities. So that was when I was attending Internet Identity Workshop, a community which is and was at the center of modern authentication, which we'll talk about today. So discussions at this community was what really helped us make our project successful, leading to global recognition. That was also a place where I started learning about Microsoft's involvement in the space, as Microsoft has been sponsoring this event for 15 years, and I was fascinated about Microsoft's commitment and passion to digital identity. So today, after a quick introduction, we'll deep dive into modern authentication space. I wanted to start off with a core question in identification is very simple. Are you really who you say you are? And we need to keep answering this question because there's an incentive to lie for people to pretend to be others. Identification in the physical world has worked for centuries. Let's say you're a student and you want to use a student discount in a museum. And museum can verify the validity and authenticate your card because it trusts the university who issued that student card in the first place. What about the digital world? I want you to take a moment and think, when you're interacting with someone on the internet, how do you make sure that that person is really who she says she is? Or when you're using a web app, how is that web app making sure that you are who you say you are? Here. When we talk about identity, it ranges from traditional enterprise identity to more modern consumer identity. And when we talk about enterprise identity, it's really about whether right employees have right access to the right resources in the right place in the right time. So for example, you're starting an internship in a new company. It's company's responsibility to make sure you have access to the resources so you can start doing your job from day one without, accidentally having access to any confidential information, and also that you lose that access to the resources when you leave and finish your internship. Consumer identity, it's more about whether right users have right experience in the right place and the right time. So for example, imagine you purchased a music streaming service. It's up to the service provider to make sure you receive the service according to your subscription and only when you're actually paying for that subscription. I hope this sort of gets you an idea how fundamental identity is to a seamless and productive digital experience. Well, let's take a look where we all started. This is Yelp's login page. And what it's doing is asking a user, give us your email address and the password, and we're going to use it to log in on your behalf to Gmail to do whatever we need to do. Sounds crazy, isn't it? No one does it anymore. But this was not that long ago because Yelp started in 2004, I think. So it actually, even if it sounds crazy, it may work if a client and a server are owned by the same people, but it becomes dangerous the moment a client is written by a different organization. That's where it can be a malicious client. So let's take a look at modern authentication. And I'm calling it modern to differentiate with the legacy authentication. If you're interested in legacy authentication, I encourage you to look up protocols like SMTP, IMAP, POP, and such. So this is where we started, and we don't want to be using username and password anymore. So what we do is we introduce a player called identity provider. So what server does, it actually tells a client, go to identity provider, or IDP for short, authenticate yourself, get a token, and then show me that token. And because a server has a trust relationship with an identity provider, they're going to verify that token, if it's true or not. And in case you're wondering, token is not, a crypto token like Bitcoin. Token is a cryptographically signed document that contains claims, and claims are the information about identity, so this calling a server. And identity does not necessarily have to be an individual. It can be a device or a software process. An example of claims can be when the claim is issued at, its expiration date, a subject, which is essentially an identifier of an identity, or the audience, which specifies a server where this token is intended to be used. So those were basics, and they differ according to what type of server or client we're talking about. So let's take a look at web applications, where a client is a browser and the server is a website. And as an IDP, we introduce a Microsoft service called Azure Active Directory. This is more for B2B scenarios, and there's another Microsoft service called Azure Active Directory B2C. So imagine Alice, because it's always Alice or Bob, right? Alice wants to take a look at her favorite website. So what her browser does is it asks for resources to a website. And website, because it has a trust relationship with an IDP, Azure Active Directory in our case, are going to redirect Alice to an IDP. And that's where IDP is going to ask Alice to authenticate herself with whatever means, password or authenticator app. And once it knows for sure that Alice is who she says she is, it's going to send a token via HTTP post. And website verifies that token using a signing key of an IDP. And once it's sure it's a valid token, it's going to display the website to Alice's browser. So, but imagine Alice opens a website, took a look, closed it, and after 10 minutes, she's like, oh, I forgot to check that out. Let me reopen the browser, the website. And does her browser has to do this token dance again? Oh, no, because they'll accidentally already put it, but website put an HTTP cookie to the browser and established a session. So HTTP cookie is a piece of information that website puts to a browser, which says, browser, please send this back to me on every request you send for a particular host. So next time Alice logs in, she can asks for a resource. She just needs to present a cookie. And you may be wondering why we need both cookie and token, but that's because token works across domains, but cookie works only in one domain. Now, let's take a look. Oh, sorry. Here's a quick note that if you're a developer and you're looking to implement this, you'll face standards called protocols, and the most common protocols right now are SAML, OpenID Connect, or VS Federations and such, and they save us. They literally are a lifesaver, because no developer wants to live in a world where they have to implement one process for Google sign-in, another process for Microsoft sign-in, so these protocols are our saviors. Now let's take a look at one more exciting aspect, which is single sign-on. And obviously, we access not just one website or several. And again, it would be hectic if we would have to go through this token dance every single time. So single sign-on allows the user access different websites without entering credentials every single time. Another aspect I wanted to highlight is a federation, because in previous examples, we assumed that identity provider, Azure Active Directory, knows Alice's credentials, so it can authenticate Alice. Well, what if it can't? What if credentials are actually stored on-premise with Azure Directory or, with Active Directory or Active Directory Federation service? So that's why we need federation in this kind of scenarios.
And I'm
in here,
Azure Portal. We have different Azure services.
We have different Azure quick demo of Azure Active Directory.
Azure Active Directory right here. We have a lot here.
Let's go the one that we use the long.
users, you can add users one by
you
one,
can add users one by one, or you can import
This is
them
the
in
user I
bulk.
created to
This is the
complete the
user I
MS Learn
created to
module that
complete the
I
MS
really
Learn
encourage
module
you
that
to
I
do.
really encourage you to do.
If you choose a
And
user,
you can also reset password or do multi-factor authentication. And
if you're
because
managing an
if
organization
you're
which
managing
has
an
tens or
organization
thousands
which
of
has
users,
tens or
you don't want
thousands
to
of
manage them one
users,
by one,
you don't
so
want
you
to
can
manage them
create
one by
groups,
one, so you
and
can
let's say
create
apply
groups
different
and let's
policies
say
according
apply
to
different
groups,
policies
marketing,
according to groups,
sales,
marketing, sales,
whatever you have.
whatever you have.
And so you mentioned
And
password
so you
reset.
mentioned
It can also be
password
done from
reset.
here.
It can also be
Right now
done
I
from
have
here.
self-service
Right now I
password
have
reset
self-service
enabled
password
from
reset
only for certain
enabled
groups.
from only for
There's a
certain
lot you
groups.
can do here.
There's a lot you can do
Regarding
here.
multi-factor
Regarding
authentication, that
multi-factor
sits under
authentication, that
security
sits
right
under
here.
security
And I also
right
wanted to
here.
highlight
And I
conditional
also wanted to
access, which
highlight
is very
conditional
important.
access, which is very important.
Let's say you can require
Let's say
multi-factor
you can
authentication
require
only for
multi-factor
admins. With
authentication only for
block legacy
admins. With
authentication, you have to
block
be
legacy
careful with this,
authentication,
but
you have
it
to be
can be
careful
very,
with
very
this, but
effective
it
in
can be
securing
very,
your
very effective in
organization.
securing your
And
organization.
also, maybe one last
And
thing is
also,
app
maybe one last
registration,
thing is app registration,
where you can
where you
register
can
certain web
register
servers or
certain
apps
web
to
servers
Azure
or
Active
apps
Directory, so
to
it
Azure
knows
Active Directory, so it
knows them beforehand.
Right, so that was a quick show of Azure Active Directory, and honestly, it's just a tip of an iceberg. I encourage you to take a look at the identity section in Microsoft Docs. Great documentation. To start is Microsoft Learn module on identity access and management. So at Build, we launched Learn TV, so you can take a look at identity videos there that I helped to pick as well. And you may be wondering why we need this a little bit complicated system of modern authentication. And I have a simple answer for you. Because there is a big problem of compromised accounts. And I will also show you a small trick how you can secure your account in less than a minute. Microsoft has over 30 billion login events a day. And out of those, in January 2020, we had over 1.2 million compromised accounts, which is 0.5% of enterprise accounts on Microsoft systems, which means that if you have an organization of 10,000 users, 50 of them are going to be compromised in a month. It is a huge number, but I wanted to ensure you that Microsoft is working very hard to improve this, and we are making a good progress. And here's a bit of the data. So data shows that 80% of those compromised accounts were done by password spray and replay attacks. And 40% of those were password sprays, where an attacker takes a password that tends to be reused. Well, turns out we're not that creative in creating passwords, and they apply that password to different email addresses or usernames they managed to get from, some other external sources. And here's just an example of a software that people could purchase for not an expensive amount and do password sprays. And another 40% by password replay attacks, where you take a password and that works for one website and you reuse it across websites, and that just takes advantage of our nature to reuse passwords across websites. And another interesting piece of data, over 99% of password spray attacks were using legacy auth, and over 97% of password replay attacks were using legacy auth as well. So legacy authentication is much less secure than modern authentication. In other words, that's why we need modern authentication, because it's much harder to steal in a system like this than simply spraying and replaying a password. But as you may remember, there was one element here where Alice had to authenticate herself as an IDP, and she could use a password here. So if we can do this one trick, we can make modern authentication even more secure as well. And that is multi-factor authentication. The good news is more and more people are going passwordless, and alternatives we offer to them is a hardware security key combined with biometrics, or a hardware security key combined with a PIN code, or a phone running the Microsoft Authenticator app. Which one sounds the simplest, the easiest? An app, isn't it? So let's say we can secure ourselves using Microsoft Authenticator app within a minute. And just to note that MFA is a method where you add a security layer to your account by adding one or more layer.
So let me show
So
you
let
how
me show you
to do
how
a
to do
two-step
a two-step verification.
Here I am
Here
logged
I am
into
logged
Microsoft
into
account
Microsoft
using my
account using
personal
my personal
address.
address.
We go
We
to
go to
security,
security
and
okay,
okay,
let's sign in again.
And right
And right
here
on the top we have a two-step
So
verification.
you can
So you can also go from here, more security
If you
option.
just
If
click
you just
here,
click
turn it
here,
on,
turn it on,
and set
and
up two-step
set up two-step verification.
You read the
You read the
instructions,
instructions, push next.
It's telling you
It's telling you
here we're trying to
here
get
we're
an
trying
app,
to get
so
an
we
app,
choose
so
an
we
app,
choose an app,
get it
get
now,
it now,
and it says
and
in
if it's
Japanese,
in Japanese,
you'll
but
have
you have
here's an
here's
authenticator
an
app
authenticator
page,
app page, and because I already
now I have to
have, now I
sign
have to
into my
sign
account
into my
using my
account
app.
using my app.
So here I'm opening my phone and
So
signing
I
in.
So I signed in using my
Outlook.jp
Outlook.jp account
using the app,
using the app,
and here
and here
I'm all
I'm
set.
all set.
Done.
Done.
Cool. So I forgot to mention that this MFA using Microsoft Authenticator app, you can do it with any personal address you have. It doesn't have to be a Microsoft address, and it doesn't have to be registered with the Azure Active Directory. So now you know how simple it is. I hope you can help those around you to secure themselves as well. So now you're passwordless. Welcome to the world of digital trust. We started off with identity today, but I think we took a little glimpse into how closely identity is intertwined with security and privacy as well. So I forgot to mention, or I didn't have time, but another super exciting aspect of digital identity is actually the space of decentralized identity, where again Microsoft is playing a very important role. So if you want to learn more about this, drop me a comment or DM me and I'll be happy to talk about it more. Thank you.